Welcome to Mojo Talks, where we explore the world through stories. I'm Mayur Chennagiri, visual storyteller and your host. Welcome to Mojo Talks with Mayur Chennagiri, and today we have a very special guest. He's a serial entrepreneur, and the way I would describe him is an explorer. We have Arjun Narayan, who was the MD founder of Catamaran, and also currently you are with Sirocco, who you co-founded, and also has a very rich connection to Bangalore, which we will be talking more. But essentially, the topic of discussion today, which we want to explore, is a bit more on startup culture. How do we handle startups and the stress around it? But there's a very interesting anecdote which transformed Arjun's life, which was a burnout. And we will be talking more on that. Arjun, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mayur.
Glad you could make it.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah.
So Arjun, you're an old Bangalorean and you have roots to Kempegowda. I mean, that's quite interesting. So,
Yeah. You know, I sometimes joke with my friends that I am what is described as an Aboriginal Bangalorean. Meaning we were here like doing our thing and then slowly the city grew up around us, you know. So my mother's side of the family lives where we live today, where I live today, for about 250 years.
Wow.
The story goes that we moved there around the time that Lal Bagh was founded, and Lal Bagh was founded 1760 or so. And the family profession for the longest time on my mother's side was horticulture. Like my great-grandfather used to make seeds and export them. So I don't know if you remember that whole lane from like Wilson Garden all the way down was all nurseries once upon a time. Yeah, and because of that, like, you know, where I live, my mother lives next to her four sisters. So basically, I live next to my cousins. One block over is like my mother's cousins, and then so on and so forth. So if you ever see the name like Hulkul anywhere, that's my mother's family name.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you'll see them all the way from like Lal Bagh to like Lavelle Road. And Lavelle Road is actually, if you go to the coffee day on Lavelle Road, you'll see the actual name of it, M.L. Subbaraju.
Yeah.
That's my granduncle.
Wow.
Yeah, my mother's father used to be mayor as well in the 50s. Yeah.
If I were to draw parallel to what happened to the place where you stay now, the area. So you've seen that place transform from, you know, horticulture and to what it is, a key commercial area. Do you fear something like that will happen even to Devanhalli House?
Yeah,
Because
I think so.
it's prime property now.
Yeah, I think so. I think 100% so. I mean, look, it's already happened. Like, you know, if you go to like, I don't know if you know Dumlur, Madiwala.
Madiwala, yeah.
There's actually Madiwala is a village.
Correct.
There's actually a village temple there, right? So Dumlur was a village. It's swallowed into Bangalore, right? Madiwala, similar, right?
Yeah,
so this will eventually happen. And if you go to Delhi, it has already happened. Like Nizamuddin was its own thing and it's been swallowed up. Right? So I think this is going to happen. Like a lot of the old Bangalore neighborhoods, you go to Shankarpuram or Balepete, Akkipete, Chickpete, all of those, right? And they get swallowed by the city, right? And you really only see that. I don't know if you know this festival called Karaga.
Karaga, yeah.
Karaga is a hardcore Gauda Vokkaliga festival where you make an offering to the lake. Right? For water, right? It's supposed to be you're willing to make a human sacrifice, right? So there's this guy who has a thing, and he walks and there are people behind him and all that stuff. Theoretically, if the guy drops the pot, the guy with the sword is supposed to like kill him, right? You know, they're lined up for a blood sacrifice, you know.
Bloody hell.
Yeah. In school also we read this poem, Kerega Hara, like you give food to the lake because the lake will give you food back. So you can still see like, you know, that the old villages inside Bangalore, Halasuru, Halsur, they have their own Karaga.
Yeah.
Madiwala,
We have our own Karaga.
have their own Karaga, right? So I think this eventually happens to cities in India.
Thankfully, you know, there are few people who are interested in rehashing the history.
Are there?
Oh yeah, there are a few. At least in pockets, there are a few people who still go back and, I mean, we see those podcasts and this thing where they are trying to kind of relive or.
I think there's a pros and cons to it. I think part of the appeal of Bangalore is like, I honestly think it's the most American city in India. Like, you know, it's like,
it can't get more cosmopolitan than this.
There's San Jose and there's HSR. What happens in San Jose today will happen in HSR tomorrow. Sometimes what happens in HSR today will happen in San Jose tomorrow. Right? It's the most American city in India. and it has this kind of like dynamic, property, right? It attracts people, young people from all over, blah blah blah. And one of the consequences, I think, of being such a dynamic city is that it has no memory of itself.
True.
Like Americans are just always about the future. What's next?
What's
right?
next?
And I think Bangalore, as it gets more and more American, is also like that. So I think if you go to Silicon Valley and tell people like, once upon a time there were walnut groves over here, people will be like, "What are you talking about?" And it's true, but it's like not relevant.
Not relevant anymore.
So I think that's sort of like, for better or for worse, like the curse of Bangalore, like, and if I think I've seen a lot of change in my life, when I graduated from college, Bangalore had 5 million people and now it has 11, like in my life, it's like, 6 million. But like if I compare the changes in my life to what my mother saw, my mother used to cycle to school to Baldwin's and there were fields there. There was a lake there.
Lake there.
Like what is now like the hockey stadium was literally
Literally
a
a
lake.
Yes.
Yeah,
I know.
We used to play cricket on Lal Bagh.
Lal Bagh.
On Lal Bagh main road. Which is now like one of the main roads connecting north and south.
You can't even cross
You
the
can't
road
even
now.
Cross. It's like one of the main roads connecting. That and Hosur main road are the two north-south, If you go to center of city and you want to go from north to south, it's either Lal Bagh Road or Hosur.
Hosur Road,
Yeah,
correct.
no other choices, right?
So now I know where you get that explorer spirit in you and the entrepreneur spirit. So somewhere, the history, the family, you've seen that.
Yeah,
I guess it's
think
also there in your
remarkable.
DNA.
Like most of the members of my family, they go out, but they always come back. Like all my cousins, they've all studied abroad. They've all come back.
I'll come back.
Something bizarre. I think for us, honestly, it's the family. Like if on a random Friday, if we get together, I'll have 25 members of my family. And I feel this a lot when I'm in the US, right? In the US, like for you to get 25 members of your family together in one place is like, it's never going to happen.
It's
right?
never going to happen.
Like, it's got to be like
It's a project in itself.
It's a project. It's once, but like this on any weekend, this can happen, and also there's an intergenerational thing, because I have my older uncles and grand uncles and stuff like that, and you get to interact with people at different generations. In the US, when I go there as an immigrant, more or less, right? So all the people I know are like my age, more or less. They're building their lives, building their careers. Like there are no like grandparents floating around. There are no like random cousins who've just like checked out. Like no school friends who appear to do nothing. Like
It's almost like starting from scratch, right? I mean, you're building your life, everything. Everything is from scratch.
Yeah.
So
And they actually talk about immigration as like rebirth.
yeah.
Like there's a whole death that happens and you create a new life.
New life.
And so it has all the same issues. So honestly, to have the same kind of richness that I have in Bangalore, it probably will take 3 generations in the US. Minimum.
Easily.
Minimum, right? It takes 3 generations to have like a full diversity of characters in your family. One generation, everybody's focused. Second generation, they kind of focus. Third generation, you get the full rainbow. All personality types, all professional choices, all personal choices. Takes time for the rainbow to...
And so if I were to link that to the startup culture, we are, especially in India, right? We are looking at the boom of startups.
Yeah.
I personally feel we are at
No, it's a city
the
of dreams.
innovation, the best time to be.
Yeah, Bangalore.
Bangalore.
Yeah.
Right?
Like that song, no? Sapno Ka Sheher.
Sapnon ka Sheher.
It used to be Bombay. But
Now
now it's Bangalore.
Bangalore.
Sapno Ka Sheher is Bangalore. Yeah.
But then, Sapnon ka Sheher, yes, it is Bangalore. Like, it's got the talent, it's got this... The
opportunity.
Opportunity, everything. But then, if you look at founders from South versus North, there is a huge difference in mentality. And since you've been at the core of startups,
Yeah.
what do you see? How do you...
Yeah, I would say like a Delhi, Bombay startup, I would say is more like dhanda driven.
Yeah.
Like, get the number, get this. And I think the Bangalore startups tend to be a little bit more like process platform driven, right? And honestly, you need both. If you don't have the dhanda, stuff like that, especially early on, you don't generate the momentum, you don't generate the interest, so you can't attract the capital and so on and so forth. So pretty early on, I think you do need to have a bit of the like fake it till you make it kind of energy, but like it's not sustainable. Like, and under the hood, if you don't build like a solid tech platform, solid processes, like high quality engineering and so on and so forth, it's going to fizzle out, right? And we've seen this wave before, like we've seen it in all the e-commerce stuff, right? There was a distinct difference in trajectories between the Delhi-based e-commerce startups and the Bangalore-based e-commerce ones. Right? They went different paths, right?
Which is more sustainable?
I'm clearly biased a little bit towards the Bangalore way of doing it. I call it more South India, Bangalore, Chennai, so on and so forth. I think it's better.
One thing that in our interaction over the last decade or so with a lot of startup founders, when we are creating the stories and trying to put their stories out there, one thing that's come out strong is they believe in doing everything. But then, over a period of time, they burn out. What's your take on that? Can startups, should they build a better ecosystem early on versus saying that, okay, I'm going to build a product, I'm going to build the service, I'm going to do the marketing, I'm going to do the finance. How important is it to have a core team, invest in a core team right at the beginning?
Yeah.
Because most of them do it much later.
Yeah. I had this interesting project that I did early on in Catamaran, the first year, where, we hired a friend of mine who's now actually a very well-known novelist. This guy's written 3 novels, etc. And we had him interview, I think, like 20 or 30 founders, of whom like 18 or 19 had not quote-unquote succeeded.
Okay.
But to just get a cross-section of what the entrepreneurial journey actually looks like when you're not successful. And like, it's only successful like not even 10% of the time.
Yeah,
90% of the time it's not successful, right? And to get a sense of what the psyche and all that stuff, right? And, I feel like back in the day, there was a bit more of a bias towards doing everything yourself. But, you unlearn that pretty quickly. Like if you wish to survive as a startup, you want to attract specialists, And I think one of the great things about the startup journey is that it tells you very quickly all the things you're bad at. Like you may think you're a great product guy, but until you actually meet really good product people, then you're like,
Correct.
oh my God, this guy is like
There.
right? And it very quickly narrows down like what your actual skills are. Like for example, and it helps you identify new skills too. Like for example, I never knew I was a good sales guy. I just had to do it. And then I found I loved it. There's a storytelling, there's a risk reward. You walk into a room, you don't know what's going to happen. Missiles are coming at you from all sides. Blah. I learned to really enjoy it. I learned to discover
There's a certain kick to it, isn't it?
there's a rush to it. Like, it's like walking on stage when you don't have a script, okay? And then somehow entertaining the audience or get them talking to each other. Which is really,
And you don't even know how the audience are going to react.
You know how they will react. So I discovered, for example, that I'm like really good at that, right? I discovered also that like, that ability to do that myself, I couldn't transfer it to the rest of my sales team, And so I needed to hire specialists who are better at that and so on and so forth. I still do quote unquote difficult sales, the early part I do that. And,
Then you hand over.
I can, and then, and hand over. So I think this is a similar story you'll hear from all entrepreneurs. Ultimately, they want to build a great team. I feel like the old model of like I want to control everything. I don't think that's the case anymore. I don't think that's the driver of burnout or whatever it is. The problem of burnout is I think fundamentally that it's a really long journey. But if you're successful, it's still a 12-year, 14-year journey. If you're unsuccessful, also it's a 12-year, 14-year journey. No matter what you do, it's a 12-year, 14-year journey, and it's lonely. It's a lonely journey, right? I think that's, if I were to like hang my hat on like what makes, an entrepreneur burnout or not burnout, it's like how they manage that loneliness.
Let's talk about that. Because I know you personally went
You
through
personally know, right? You've been through it yourself. Like, like it's everybody's story. It's every entrepreneur's story. It's lonely.
And it doesn't matter that whether you're in the tech, business, creative, doesn't matter. You have that burnout.
It's
and you're
lonely.
Right.
It's loneliness is that. Whether it turns into burnout or not depends on how you manage it. Yeah. But the loneliness is inherent, it
is.
In the journey.
And it's not easy.
It's not easy.
It's not easy, being the head of sorts, right? You are leading the team. You got to have that positive outlook through and through. Then you have your family, you have your ecosystem to keep them all motivated with a single focused goal while you know what the pitfalls are.
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can share.
Right?
Right?
So much
It's led to this.
Everybody has a job, you have everybody else's headache. You end up becoming counselor, marriage advisor, like everything. Mr. Murthy used to say it's like being a parent, which I've never been a parent, so I don't have them. It says like you kind of have to be like the parental figure.
And that's
Hard.
It's hard.
It's
and I
hard.
think
Yeah.
I love the fact that you mentioned that, because I'm also a parent.
Yeah. So you tell me.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
And every
Is it
day is a new
similar?
discovery.
Is it similar?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And many times when, like, you said, you put the hat of a counselor, I've been doing that for so many years. And in some way, I keep telling this to Priya and many of my friends that maybe it's the universe's way of preparing me for what's coming up to deal with. Have you ever been in that situation or felt something like that?
So such a good question, Mayur. I think there's a bit of a taboo in the entrepreneurial world about talking about the difficulty of the journey. Right? It's just like founders or founder CEOs are like these heroic figures who know everything, see everything, etc., etc. But there's a cost to this, right? And I personally experienced it. Right? I didn't experience it when I was younger, I think, because I think my body was maybe just more resilient. But as I got over, and I think this is part of the reason people say entrepreneurship is a young person's game, blah blah blah. But as I got closer and closer to 40, right, I think the constant loneliness of the entrepreneurial journey became harder and harder to bear. And I think, like around the time I was maybe 41, 42, the pandemic hit. We had a professional CEO. We were going through a bunch of transitions at work, etc., etc. I think I went through what like a textbook case of burnout.
Okay.
And I say textbook because there actually is a textbook around this. I later on read the textbook. It's written by this lady called Christine Maslach, who's in California. She's the pioneer of burnout. So there's something called the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which is a questions that it's a WHO standard now. Like there are 5 inventories. It was mostly designed for the healthcare professions, for nurses, emergency providers, also educators, and so on and so forth. And there's a general section, which I think applies to entrepreneurs and everybody else. But I think what happens in the journey is like if you don't take care of yourself, right? You first go through like a phase of like just exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, which I thought was normal. The startups you're working all the time anyway. I was like, this is the journey, right? So, but I didn't recognize it for what it was. Then from there, you get into like a kind of like cynicism, okay? And like you sense like, you get a little bit cynical about like your situation, your colleague's situation, your human empathy starts depleting. You get irritated over small things. You're not able to see the big picture. So that is a big warning sign. In like Christine Maslach's book, that is phase 2. Phase 1 is exhaustion. Phase 2, she calls it depersonalization, right? I definitely went through it. I used to get feedback from my employees saying that, Arjun's very tough. In my mind, I was not tough. It's just that I was so short of time and emotional reserves, right? Like, things that could have potentially phrased as a question, I would phrase as a statement. Like, for example, do you think that's the only way of looking at this? Versus like, guys, there's more than one way of looking at this, right? And it's the same information. It's just conveyed.
You just don't have the patience.
You just don't have the gas.
Yeah.
You just don't have the gas in your tank.
And it's like, to just get it done.
Yeah, just get it done, and that's phase 2, right? And, if there are any entrepreneurs who were listening to this, like if you are doing this and if you are getting this feedback, you are in phase 2, right? And you can be in phase 2.
And that's a major red flag.
Major red flag. You can be in phase 2 for a long time, okay, depending on how well you take care of your body and all that other stuff. And phase 2 is recoverable. You can get out of phase 2, right? You get to phase 3, it's not recoverable. Phase 3 is, they describe it as like catastrophic loss of productivity. It's bad. Like, for example, for doctors, when they hit phase 3, they give up their practice. Okay, many of them don't go back.
Wow.
They just don't go back. Nurses, similar. They burn out, they never go back. They'll do anything else in the world but that,
It's almost like you're in a situation where something that you absolutely loved
Yeah.
is like
something you absolutely love has turned into something that's like absolutely killing you. Yeah, yeah. And in the WHO category of like diseases, they put like burnout is not a disease. Okay, it's not classified as a disease. And let me
I
just
think it should be.
I don't think it should be. I
Okay.
think it's an occupational hazard. Okay, it's an occupational hazard, something you need to watch out for, like having flammable gas, in your factory or oxygen. It's an occupational hazard. You got to watch out for it. You got to manage for it, right? And in the actual literature, it's not very well studied, but they put it next to things like PTSD, because it has some of the same like stress responses, or they put it next to like minor depressive disorder, right? Because it has some of the same. It's not the same, right? But it has some
very similar.
when you get the bad version of it, like you have similar hormonal responses, cortisol responses, blah blah blah. It's bad, And once you go to phase 3, like there's no quick recovery. In many cases, there's no recovery. Like,
Okay.
people just never go back. Like I have, I don't know if I told you, I have this yoga retreat in Spain, which I started when I was 37. And we get so many people over there who come to recuperate from their lives. And for example, we have 2 full-time cooks over there. And, for the last year, one of our cooks has been this guy who used to run Michelin star restaurants, okay? 6 of them. Got completely burnt out.
Wow.
Was just unable to function in the kitchen. Took time off to do like a martial art or stuff like that, and now comes back, and now he's with us. He's been with us for 2 years. He cooks amazing, but he also takes time off to do like capoeira, and that's his like handling mechanism. So we have in my yoga retreat, we end up getting a lot of people who have like burnt out from a previous life, whatever it is, engineering. Like I think executive cooks are like one of the hardest jobs on earth. Like,
Yeah.
like
And
multi-restaurant executive chef is like one of the hardest jobs on earth. Yeah.
so one is the process of it, right? I mean,
Stop at phase 2. Phase
That's it.
2, you can recover. If you follow on to phase 3, you are in deep
trouble.
Deep trouble.
so how did you how did you personally work around it?
I mean, first of all, I didn't know I was having this. Like like I said, there's like a taboo in the whole startup world to acknowledge that you're.
So Arjun, sorry, I just want to add this. It's just not in the startup world.
It's everywhere, no?
It's everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't even want to categorize it. I don't want to say creative. It's everywhere.
Creative people get a lot, no?
Yeah, creative people. One is, if you keep the business commercial side of it, the creative people, it's the thing about chasing perfection, right? Everything that you deliver has to be perfect.
Yeah.
And you're constantly thinking creatively, you have this whole vision, and
Yeah.
if you don't achieve that,
Yeah.
it just gets to you.
Yeah.
Right.
So just a side note on that, like in the middle of this, like I was, in Singapore for the Taylor Swift concert, and then I accidentally bumped into like a whole collection of my batchmates from MIT, right?
Okay.
International students from Asia. We were like international students. We were like all like refugees hanging out together. We're all very close, right? 10 of us were in the same city at the same time. So we got together and we had dinner. Okay. 5 out of 10 had like literally reached this point where they're like, I cannot continue doing what I'm doing professionally. I need to take some time off. And there was no pattern. Okay, one of them was a chemical engineer, one was a hedge fund guy, one was a tech guy, it was me, etc. And I think sitting in that room with the 10 of us and 5 of us, I actually finally felt less ashamed.
You felt at home.
I felt less ashamed of having, because it's like the shame around not being able to like power through, right? And I concluded from that, again, like the reason why, this was 50% in my peer group was that, the people who go to MIT are very passionate. They don't go to MIT because they want to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
They go to MIT because they're in love with something. Right? That's the creative link there, right? Yeah. People who are extremely passionate about a thing can do that thing for extraordinarily long periods while simultaneously depleting themselves and not noticing.
So very true.
That happens,
Yeah.
A byproduct of passion is occupational risk of burnout. it happens. And if you're a passionate person, you've been used to like driving yourself since you were a child. Like I used
Yeah.
to, like I remember like lab projects I would get into, and I would go like a week, without proper sleep or stuff like that. And there was a kick to it, right? Like, or I'd get into like something that I was really excited about building and so on and so forth, and like I wouldn't talk to my mom for like a week, and then my mother wouldn't know if I was alive or dead. Like, I was just so in the thing, and I'm sure you have similar stories.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, see,
you get
every time.
Yeah.
I mean, so recently we were talking about the project that I've been working for the last 1 year,
Yeah.
right? It's about vibrations, capturing
Yeah, yeah.
vibrations,
Oh, yeah. That's
sound,
so
and
cool. Yeah, yeah.
right? And the project started off as when I was bored.
Yeah.
It was not like I had planned. It was an idea that came. I've been seeing few reels and stories around the
Yeah.
similar concept, but then applying that to classical Indian music. But then when you start working on it and
Yeah.
it goes on for like, I spent 12 hours,
Yeah.
13 hours on,
Yeah, yeah.
and you're lost. And the same thing applies to many of the projects.
Yeah.
But then you're right. You come to a point where you say, I had enough.
Yeah, and I think that's a risk when you go to work with passion. I think we should really explicitly talk about it. Like, if you are going to work as a passionate person, you have a risk of like, and like, I actually know the mechanism by which this happens. And by the way, you can see this actually most strongly with like medical professionals, okay, nurses, emergency. Like, if you're an emergency doctor, right, your job is literally saving people's lives. Like,
And you got to be
Literally
24/7.
24. So, like the people who do that, they have lots of other options in life. They do that out of a passion for it, right? Because you go there, you do something, somebody's life is saved, right? And so what happens to them is like they enter this field with a tremendous amount of passion. It drives them for years, right? And then the ones along the way, like things can happen where like you feel more and more like you're working for other people, but you're neglecting yourself, right? Like you may get trapped in like paperwork or bureaucracy, right? And then,
The
it's
mundane
like,
things.
Yeah, there's like roughly 30% of a doctor's life is paperwork, right? Especially in the US, right?
But I want to add this here. For all there are kids like recently I was giving a talk at a school and they were like, "Oh, photographer, you're creating images, blah blah blah." But the reality of what we do behind the scene is that we spend 80% on paperwork,
Yeah.
taxes,
Yeah.
quotations. It's really 20% of the creative
Now
work.
imagine you did a business on that, okay? And you had like 20 photographers and you had to do all of their paperwork.
Yeah. So you're essentially going back to the corporate world that you quit.
What happens is the thing that you loved, becomes a smaller fraction of it. Like, I had this joke with a friend of mine, how people like in the Gen Z say, I'm not fulfilled because, there's 30% of my job, they don't like. As an entrepreneur, there's 10% of your job that you love. You're doing very good. Like, 90% is things that you like should do or have to do, not necessarily want to do or love to do.
I have so many friends, Arjun. I mean, so many of them who, quit their regular jobs to take up photography, music, whatever. And 90% have gone back.
Yeah.
They realized that, going back, they had this sanity.
Yeah. Like turning your passion into a profession, to be trained to watch out for. Yeah, if you turn your passion into a profession and you don't manage this, like there's a very real risk that you will like basically hurt yourself in this way,
On the long run.
I don't know, not just hurt yourself, but like hurt everybody, like hurt your colleagues, hurt your
Family.
hurt everybody. Like, it's like
And you
it's-
kind of go into social isolation as well, isn't it?
I really think of actually, I really come to think about, Christine Maslach talks about it, you can read about it in her work. I really come to think of it as like a disease of isolation, because your journey is so complicated, like you can't share it with a lot of people around you. You can share it with your partner to some extent, but like, beyond a point, like they can't really, participate as well. If you have two co-founders and you get along really well, I really think 2 is a good number for like, 'cause then you can maybe share each other, constantly. But even then, like you have your own individual, journey to
Battles
take,
that you're
battles to
fighting.
take, right? And I think if you don't explicitly see that and you don't explicitly manage for things that like, allow you to reduce that sense of isolation, right? then I think it gets really hard.
So Arjun, let's dig
Yeah.
slightly deeper into this, the phases
Yeah.
that one would go through.
Yeah.
Not necessarily clinically, but based on your experience. And I think there's so many things that you're saying that I relate to,
Yeah.
right? Having gone through that phase
Yeah.
or going through the phase. So social isolation is something which typically is the first tipping point.
It just gets worse.
It just gets worse from there, right? Your social circle slowly starts shrinking. You don't have the patience for bullshit. You just want to kind of get to the point, right? So that's a big red flag that can be identified immediately.
You'd think so.
If
But
you know what you're in,
but somebody else
if
needs
you're,
to tell you,
if
yeah.
you're,
somebody else needs to tell you. It's like the way I think about it is like you have a color picture of your life, and then slowly the color goes to like
starts fading out.
goes to grayscale, then it goes to monochrome, and eventually like everything is kind of like gray, and you don't notice it because you're just getting boiled slowly. I think for me the tipping point was, I think, when I found that I couldn't sleep properly. I've never had problems sleeping, and then I found I had lost my ability to read long form. I used to read, I have 5 books here. I used to read a lot, and a lot of successful entrepreneurs, they read a lot,
Correct.
They've done a good job of maintaining themselves. But like, if you get to the point where your attention span and stuff like that is so short that you can't like read like a 20-page, article, essay, whatever it is, right? Then, like you've lost something fundamental. Like you've lost, books are your ability to learn from other people's experiences. No, you've lost that. It's gone out of your life. Yeah. And that's a big like negative, like for me, like books are always my passion. Like books are my passion, travel exploration is passion. I stopped caring about travel, stopped reading books. I don't think I read like a long form book for like 6 years. I could read like essays, like short articles, but like a book, I was like, oh my God. It's not even about the time. Like sometimes I'm in the airport, I'd have the time. I just couldn't do it. It's just stare at the book like it's like a block of wood.
So it's almost like, I'll be very honest, it's every phase that you're talking about is something that I can relate to,
Yeah.
especially in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're in phase 2 or phase 3?
Thankfully, I'm still in phase 2.
Yeah. Phase 2 is recoverable. Like,
Exactly. I mean, that's what I realized. I'm still in phase 2. And yeah, within my close circle, I've spoken about it. I said, like, listen, I can feel that happen. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this is like,
what happens on the other side?
Exactly. So Arjun, on that note, what are the typical things that you think one should look out for?
I think phase 1 is very hard to tell, right? Because the name for the category is like emotional exhaustion, right? If you're doing something difficult, you're probably going to be exhausted, and you're probably sometimes giving more than you're getting, and so on and so forth. So I think it's actually really hard to tell, in phase 1. Phase 2, I think you can tell. The classic name for phase 2 is depersonalization, right? You get cynical. You get cynical. You lose empathy. Okay, you start to get irritable, right? You don't believe things can change, right? You start to lose interest in things that made you happy, right? You start to lose interest in, I love food. You start to lose interest in food. You start to lose interest in travel. You start to lose interest in reading. Like, the world looks like it narrows, and like you can't see any way.
Even the most positive person cannot see hope.
Cannot see hope. It feels like you're on a journey that will never end. That I think is a classic red flag. If you ask yourself, like, what are the things that used to bring you joy, and what fraction of those are you still doing? You'll tell yourself, like, just this morning, I was with Mohan Das Pai, and I was talking to him about this, and he said, like, when he was 42, he started to feel this himself at Infi. Infi externally is doing extremely well, growing very well, but he started to feel this a little bit. And I asked him what he did. He said, look, I started Akshaya Patra, okay, which is this amazing community. He said, I picked a problem that was like much bigger than myself. So I was very humble in face of this problem. And I got to work on it. It would take my whole life to do. And I got to work on it every day and make progress. And he said, like, he started to spend like 10-15% of his time
Wow.
on Akshaya Patra. And he said that renewed him, right? So I think that's like a really good like template. You know, if you're in phase 2, right, you have to make like 10% of your time available for something that like rejuvenates you, right? I think, you have to combat social isolation in the workplace. Okay, that is a mandatory thing. Like, so if you're an employee, there are employee sharing groups. There's interventions that you can do. If you're a founder, it's harder. You can find like a co-founder and you can have a session where you just talk about stuff. If you have close friends who've been on a journey, you should really drop the barrier and talk about it. You should try and bring a partner along with the journey. You should try and bring a parent along with the journey. I didn't do many of these things because I thought it was my problem, right? Why would I make it my mother's problem? Why am I making it my wife's problem? Why am I making my friend's problem? We just hang out, It was a mistake. I should have brought people along the journey with me. So you do these things to like basically like lower your social isolation, and that gives you a lot more gas. But I think everybody needs a practice where they're on the side, they're in the presence of something like much bigger than themselves, where they're out of their regular world. I often ask myself, like, why is it that I went through all of these things and my co-founder did not? And I think I know the answer, which is that like, for about 1 or 2 hours a week, my co-founder would just sit and program. He would just program. Like, wasn't about sales, he would just get into the zone. He would have like his 2 screens, like his music, everything like that. He would just program for 2 hours. In those 2 hours, like, he was in the zone, right? And he was holding on to the thing that inspired the whole thing. He was holding on to that for 1 to 2 hours a week.
I had a similar experience with when I was talking to Mike Connor, who's the founder of Atlassian.
Yeah.
And I asked him, like,
the dude codes, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I said, you run a multi-billion-dollar company. You're traveling, jet setting constantly. You're living out of a bag. Yeah. How do you keep yourself going?
Yeah.
And he said, every day, or at least I try my best every day, I take some time off and code.
Yeah.
And that's where I get ideas.
Yeah.
And many of those are codes that he works on are projects or ideas that are given by the interns. And if he sees a viability of a product or a service, he works on it and sees and then throws it to the team. Yeah. So that's very important. So it's important to go back to
you just
code.
You just got to get out of your own head. Okay, you can get out of your own head like by doing like philanthropy. Like you're providing service to somebody. It's no longer about what's in your head or something. You can get out of your head by like really spending time with your children. Yeah. I think several of my entrepreneur friends have children, and their reset is they spend like 2 hours with a young kid. The kid will not let you think about anything other than the kid. You got to be there. Like, there's no option.
True.
You got to be there. And they spend 1 or 2 hours with the kid and they're like fully refreshed. Or like programming, right? My issue was, and this is my fault, like along the way, I didn't keep track of the things that like refreshed me. And I didn't make enough time for them. I used to love like doing the data analysis. Early days before we had algorithms and all that stuff, like we were doing a lot of the analysis myself. I was running correlations, this and that. And I would like do my 12 hours of an entrepreneur, and then I would ask the team to send me data. I'd be up for like 4 or 5 hours through the middle of the night, running correlations, checking different parameters, seeing which one worked better than the other. And like I'd come back to work the next morning, I'd be like, exhausted, but I would be like jazzed. I would be like, look at this cool thing, Yeah. And then obviously, we stopped doing this manually. Started doing this with software, and I got more and more removed from it. And then like as I got more and more removed, I didn't fill it in with the other things, that I really enjoyed for like an hour or two. Like, if I just had like the awareness or the education to say like, boss, like it's actually, people talk a lot about burnout, about the hours. It's actually not about the hours, right? It's like how isolated do you feel? You can reduce that by sharing it with your circle, but there's a core of it which you got to deal with yourself, and you got to find your own like happiness practice, I would almost call it like an awe practice. There's a book about awe, and awe as like this feeling when a human being is in the presence of a problem much vaster than themselves. You're in the ocean, you're staring at it, or you're like, trying to help somebody who has a difficult, life. And for a moment, you're not in your skin, not in your head.
It becomes much bigger than you.
It's not you.
And
It's
you're,
just- yeah.
but by doing that, you might end up finding answers to your own problem.
Along the way, yeah, because
the way.
you're allowing your brain to think differently, yeah. But like I think what it does importantly is it resets your brain. So you have this piled up stuff in your head, and periodically, like any piece of software, you know, like knock it on your head and reset it, you know. And so if you don't reset it periodically, it adds up. And like when you're younger, you can tolerate it more because your body is more resilient. But you know, as you go through your 30s and your 40s, like you can't, like you
And it becomes even more difficult post 40.
because harder for post 40, right? By the way, burnout is very common among students too. Like one of the burnout inventory skills is for students, and students are in a very similar position. They come to college for something that they love, and you know it ends up becoming like this thing that they have to do,
Yeah.
not necessarily want to do. It feels overwhelming, blah blah. They get burnt out. You know, lots of kids. I mean, you know, we had students in my batch in engineering college. Engineering colleges happens a lot, right?
Happens a lot.
Happens a lot, right? Because the lab projects are like
The projects, you have your SATs, your
engineering college, medical college, law school, like the technical colleges, it happens a lot. Art school, it happens a lot, you know.
but unfortunately in the art, I'm guessing it's across the spectrum, but in art, especially in the art, substance abuse and that kind of takes over the
Hardcore.
thing. But
medical also. Huh?
Medical also.
So I think you need to basically, one, you can manage it by expanding your social circle. Like it's not just your problem. You can communicate it to people around you. I mean, it's not making, you're not turning them into a therapist. You're just making yourself less isolated. So that really buys you a lot of freedom. But you got to find like your, you know, awe practice, or your like the thing that puts you in a trance. My definition of trance is like you are not thinking about yourself. You are not thinking about tomorrow. You're not thinking about yesterday. You're in the moment. Yeah. So if you're taking care of a kid, you're in the moment, right? If you're coding, like for a minute, you're not even there. It's just like all the Crystal Palace is happening, right? You know, and sports, yeah. I think it's a big deal. You know, my one advice to like anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur long term is like develop a sporting habit. You know, develop a sporting practice alongside. You know,
and many of these successful entrepreneurs who have all spoken about that.
Yeah.
You know, having that me time in the morning before you start. It could be the gym, it could be tennis, it could be something, but have that's
somebody asked Satya Nadella, what's the first thing he does in the morning? He says, you know, he reaches for his running shoes. You know, like, and this runner's high. You run until you're tired, and then you run more. And when you run more, you're so tired that you can't think about anything
else.
except like running. You know, like, you know, and you get like the endorphin rush and all that stuff. It's literally like a high. You're in a trance, right? And you know, I mean, look, you can also do this if you're particularly religious. You can get the same thing. Like I've seen people do this. It's an amazing thing. You know, they are really in the mantra or whatever it is. They are not
the chanting.
Yeah, they're not in their body. And mantra does it. Like pranayama, yoga does it. You know, I think for some people, especially in the West, like, you know, going to like hardcore music festivals, like, and raves,
and
like they're like in it, they're like not in their body anymore, they're with everybody. That does it. I mean, it's hard to go to a rave every week, you know, like
it takes a different kind of a toll.
It's a different kind of toll. But like if an hour of this in a week gives you enough resilience to like power through everything. It's amazing how restorative it is. Like literally like 25-30 minutes of this in a week gives you the emotional buffer to do everything.
To deal with the rest of it.
You are like unbreakable when you can get that.
One of the takeaways now, the first thing is that find that circle.
Find a circle, broaden your circle. Don't isolate yourself.
If you can't find anyone, find a counselor that you can talk to, right?
Yeah.
To an extent, at least it's you're getting your
like
the load off.
Don't be shy. Don't be ashamed. Like, you know, like share it, you know. I mean, not everybody will want all of it, but like you will find people around you. So share that. Don't isolate yourself.
Second is find that physical.
Find your healing practice.
Healing practice. Healing practice. It could be running. It could be meditation. It could be scuba. Let's talk about that. We'll get to that.
You can do this in phase 2 and never get to phase 3, and you know you can do this indefinitely. If you can find this, you know, in your life, like you will Okay, you will work as much as needed for as long as needed. Like, there are cardiac surgeons and stuff like that who work crazy hours their entire life because they are in the OT, and the OT for like 2 hours, they're just there, right? They're not thinking about what comes before, what comes after. Brain, body, breath, everything. It's just right there. And it's just healing. I think that's part of the reason why like these surgeons can like work so many hours.
So the brain body breath that you're talking about, in photography parallels, I call it the Zen of photography.
Yeah, it's the same. In your camera, the object,
You're there in that moment.
all there, and that is like, I think that's the thing that pulls you to it. No, if you lose track of it, no, it can be a problem.
Yeah.
I think that was what happened to me. Like I lost track of the thing that actually made it all Zen-like. So what happened to me, like, I was very grateful. I had a very supportive set of colleagues and stuff like that, and we all recognized that like it had come to the point where like I needed to do something, and I didn't know what to do. Right? First of all, it's hard to like accept this and acknowledge this, not feel like a huge failure. But I think my wife was really helpful along the way. Like so my wife, she has bipolar. And she has a great blog where she talks about her journey with bipolar.
Yeah,
So
Shravani does.
Yeah. Like in her life, like talking about mental health is normal. In my life, it's not normal.
No, but see, that's the thing I love about Shravani, right? I mean,
she's very open.
she's very open about
very
it.
open about it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I think I met Shravani the first time. I mean, that's how we all connected, right? Through Shravani. And it was only into few conversations and she was so open about it. And for me, that was like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
Someone could actually talk about something
I
taboo.
mean, she's really talking about really taboo stuff. Like this is like like the stuff I'm talking about is taboo, but it's like honestly like a first world taboo problem. Like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, I work so hard. Okay, don't work so hard.
But the things that she dealt with
She
and
has
the way
no
she
choice.
did,
And
the way she's handling the whole thing, my God.
she's got this blog, Bipolar Express.
Bipolar Express.
She has a secret following of people who message her all the time, saying that, look, I'm dealing with this in my family. I'm dealing with this with my loved one. And like I'm able to draw some, parallels with this and so on and so forth. I'm always deathly scared she's going to put me on her blog. The reason I have problems is because my husband. So far,
root cause.
So far has not. So root cause is, so far has not happened. But like, yeah. So I think, for her, I think this was very normal. So she normalized a lot of this for me. And I think one of the things that she asked me to do, which I didn't take seriously at that time, but then I said, okay, I'm going to like actually take it a bit seriously. She said like, take some time off. She said, do anything, but don't use your brain.
That's the most difficult for someone who is hyperactive.
I've been like polishing my brain for like 15 years. She's like, do anything, don't use your brain. I was like, if I don't use my brain, what's left? This body is not good for anything else. And then I was just like, holy crap, let me think about this a little bit, And then I was like, the curiosity kicks in. I was like, okay, this is a new adventure, a new journey. Rest of the world, I was actually with somebody today who told me, I told them, look, I've been doing this. And they said, you're wasting your life, They said, you should be changing the world, what are you doing? But I said, look, they don't get it. It's fine,
Let me change myself first.
Let me change myself, and actually there's a great analogy for it, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, right? Like before he went on his Swaraj and all that stuff. Apparently, one day he realized that he was not physically strong, okay? And then he said, how can I make the world better if I'm not physically strong? So he took a year off and he swam, okay? Then he became a champion swimmer in a year.
Wow.
Tilak.
Okay.
Tilak took a year off, took a sabbatical, became a champion swimmer, then said, all right, let's get back to freedom.
It worked.
It's a crazy story. Yeah. And so it's actually, so there are history analogies in our life. So then I had to look at my body and be like, shit, what do I do? Like I'm not good at it. I'm not good at anything. And the analogy I would give you is like, so my mind, through like a lot of training of all that stuff, had become very athletic. It could do numbers, it could do words, it could do emotions, it could hear, now, whatever. But my body, in correspondingly, was like fairly illiterate. If I describe my mind as athletic, I would describe my body as illiterate, right? Which meant like, there are 5 dimensions of fitness: strength, endurance, flexibility, coordination, and power or reflexes, right? I would be like a 3 on 10 on all. Like an unpad. And and I was like, okay, if I'm not going to use my mind, I have this like kind of like a highly neglected body. I got to find something to do over here, right? And I had this notion even then, like I want this runner's high, but I don't want to run. That's very painful, But I want to get to runner's high somehow. And I started looking around, like what could I do, And I had a few like criteria for selecting a physical activity, right? One, it had to be like very old or have like a deep cultural connection of some sort, like, it be something that connected to the outside world, okay? Two, it had to be something where I could reliably get this like runner's high, okay? Three, it had to be something where there was a community or something that I could stay plugged into, so it wouldn't just be like a break and then I would like not do this. It would be something I could carry forward the rest of my life, I started looking through my life for what it was, The first thing I actually tried was boxing, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a boxer. I mean, I'm very big, but I'm not a boxer. And boxing to me was super interesting because it's like very old, like it's 2000 plus. It's in the first Olympics. There's a huge culture behind it, right? It is extremely cardio intensive. Like if you want, like, you can be gassed in like 10 minutes, right? Mike Tyson at his peak as a 19-year-old, could not do 12 rounds of high intensity boxing. Mike Tyson at his peak could not do 24 minutes.
Oh God.
So like you want to get gas, like boxing, you want it, it's there, right?
And it's like quick
Like that.
fix. Yeah.
Like 12 minutes, you're out. You hit that first thing, then you go through, you're in the zone, and like it was so good. Like, it was so good. I mean, I had no talent whatsoever. I had absolutely no talent, but like, it hit the culture mark. It was really good you could get into like a trance, okay? But like I had zero community. Like, I don't have friends who we would meet up and say, let's hit each other. It's like not a thing, So I was like, okay, I really enjoyed this, but like, I'm not going to be able to sustain this. So that was that, okay? Then I tried like ballroom dancing with my wife, okay? I thought it'd be great fun. It'd be something we do together, blah, 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 blah. And of course, there's huge culture behind it. There's the music, there's all that stuff.
Yeah.
Massive culture around it. Community, like if I can do it, I can do it with my wife. So, and there's a whole community around it. It was hard for me to get into the trance, but you can actually, if you really listen to the music and so on and so forth. But like, unfortunately, this was something I think Mayur, I probably spent the past year and a half or 2 years. I probably spent like $2,500 on like dance classes for me and my wife. I'm just not good at it.
You have two left feet.
It's just not happening.
I just try to imagine Arjun dancing.
It's just not happening. There are videos my wife made me do anyway. So it's just so I'm just like, okay, koshish to hai, promising, but it's not
there.
Not connecting. And then I luckily landed on like two things. One maybe more than the other, which was like in college, as a nerd and stuff like that, I was really into this stuff. So right after I graduated, I got certified as a scuba diver. And I was the habit of doing scuba, on and off on vacations, right? And I remembered that like when I go underwater, like I feel blissed out. Yeah.
I know that feeling,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
a different world.
It literally is a different world. And so I was like, all right, let me dig into this, right? And I ran it through my checklist, right? I was like, does it connect to some other world? Yes. Okay. It actually connects to this world. Like Earth is a blue planet. Earth is not a brown planet, right?
Yeah.
Like if you really want to live on Earth, like you need to know something about Earth.
And there's much more to Earth
Yeah.
underwater.
Yeah,
Right?
it's like 70%. Like, you look at it from space, Earth looks blue. Like, like it's just true. Yeah, and so if you look at what we do as human beings, we're actually creatures of the topsoil. Yeah. Everything that happens like 2 meters below the Earth, we don't know. Anything that happens like out of our reach, 3 meters is not for us. So we have like this 5 meter band, okay?
And we think we rule the
And
world.
we think we rule the world, and then I remembered that like every time I went underwater, literally like 1 meter underwater, like I would like chill out, and I recognized this as being very similar to that like runner's high kind of thing. It's not an obvious link because I'm not doing cardio and all that stuff, but something about the weightlessness, the consciousness of your breath. It's like this pranayama.
You're in sync with
you're
your
in sync with
body.
that,
You
yeah.
have to be in sync.
Have to be in sync. And like, if you breathe too much, you go up. You breathe too little, you go down. So it really forces you to calibrate your body and your breath at the same time, And I remembered that this was it. And then I was like, boss, I'm going to like double down on this one, right? And so like literally the first thing I did after like, I did 2-3 months of like boxing, didn't work out. A little bit of tennis, a little bit of ballroom, didn't work out. And then I told my wife, look, I think I'm going to go and become a dive master.
Okay.
Okay. And in Indonesia, right? And she was like, you've been talking about how much you love scuba and all that stuff, so why don't you go give it a go? And so like, I went like, my one condition for where I was going to spend a month or whatever learning scuba was that it had to have like food options. Okay.
The foodie in you.
Foodie is like, so like normally where you dive and where you get good food, they are not the same place.
Same. Yeah, yeah.
But I found this location is an island called Gili Trawangan, like, it's near Lombok, and so on and so forth. There are 2 great dive shops over there. Like, I applied to one of them, sort of I got in, I went there. And, it was really weird. Like I was 43, like everybody else who's become a dive master is 22. Okay. I was literally twice the age, people come and they do it, but they take a year and all that stuff. I was like, mid-career. So, and it's quite hard work. You carry like a dive master in the joke is in the industry is just like a unpaid donkey labor.
Yeah.
True. You carry the tag, you deal with like the drowning. And like, there's a lot of work around it. And many of those drills I couldn't do. Like, I remember this one drill I had to do in the pool where I had to take off my weight belt and put it back. If I was doing easily, I would take off my weight belt, fall on my face. And take off my weight belt, fall on my face. And I finally told the instructor, look, I'm not figuring this out right now. I'll do this later. I'll come back. I'll do this later. And she said, fine. And I went off and I practiced on my own, blah, 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 blah. And I found a different way of doing it that could work for me.
You figure something that works for you.
So it was quite hard. In the middle of it, I had to come back to India a couple of times because there was some major like court case from my work that I had to deal with and all that stuff. So I couldn't I had to do half of it, then come back, do a court case, like go back. And the instructor was like, who are you? Like, what kind of, sorry, I have to go. I have to make a deposition. I have to go. Like, you're joking. No, I'm serious. This is okay. Anyway, so I'm a bit of a weirdo in those things. So I finally like powered through it. There was some physical stuff too. Like I had to like swim, I think 400 meters. Like I'm not a great swimmer, so I had to make myself a good swimmer. I really pushed myself quite a lot, And then I did that whole dive master thing, and it was for me. It was quite cool. Some of my friends came down to Giri. My wife also came down, etc. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to try. I know how to dive now with like one tank. I'm going to try different modes, right? So I said I'm going to try diving with 0 tanks, which is free diving.
Free
right?
diving.
So when I did a bunch of like stuff on free diving, went down 19 meters, really trained myself to like hold my breath, be very calm. It's a very crazy thing. This thing called the mammalian dive reflex. It literally, it's like the human part of your brain goes off and the dolphin part of your brain turns on. Like your heart rate changes and stuff like that. I used to track it and look at it afterwards. In one of my last free dives, my heart rate went down to I think 42.
Wow.
Yeah. I sleep at like 50, 55 heart rate. The heart rate was lower than my sleeping heart rate and was still dropping when I had ran out of breath. I had to come up. If I could have trained myself to be longer, my instructor was telling me he gets his heart rate down to 25.
Wow.
Yeah. You are literally in dolphin mode. It's called the mammalian dive reflex. We all have it. You can if you put cold water on your face and stuff like that, it happens automatically. Your heart rate drops, blood comes to your center, all that kind of stuff, right? It's a trance. It's a diving trance. It's in there. It's in everybody's brain. You can access it in a pool. Like you have anxiety or freakouts, part of the treatment is put your face in ice water.
Correct.
Yeah. So I did that for a while. And I came back. And it was pretty clear to me after I did that I was on my way out. This is the bottom of the burnout. I was underwater, blowing bubbles and redesigning my life. I was I'm going to go back to work. Yeah. Yes, it's going to be in technology. Yeah. Yes, it's going to be this and that. So I was I could start to see the parts of my life that I loved. while I was in a trance. And I could start to see the parts of my life that I didn't love, I was not good at, underwater.
Start eliminating.
You could start to see, you get just a little perspective. I could accept that I was really bad at some things. I could accept that I was really good at some things. It was hard for me to accept I was good at things too, right? So that like self,
There was sudden clarity.
yeah, it's like what they say in the Gita, no? Self-knowledge.
Self-knowledge.
Self-knowledge. I started to accumulate some self-knowledge while blowing bubbles underwater, because I'd just been in a trance and so forth. When you're in phase 2, you can do the same thing, right? You can start to see the parts of your life that are good for you and the parts of your life that are not so good for you, the parts that you're good at, and you can come to peace with it and act on it.
Act on it.
Right? Then, there's actually a strong neuroscience basis for this, right? And this has been heavily covered, and I can give you a couple of different ways in which it's been covered, right? I'll get to the actual science of it. This idea of going into a trance, being in the zone, right? First described in 100 years ago by this guy called William James at Harvard, who was studying religion.
Okay.
And his thesis was at the heart of every religion is a mystical experience. Okay. He described the mystical experience as having 4 qualities to it. It would be ineffable. You couldn't describe it in words, right? It would be noetic. Things inside of it would have deep meaning. I'm underwater, I'm blowing bubbles. So that was the first description of this trance state. He used it in the context of religion, right? And then 50 years later, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
Okay.
And that was his name. It was very hard to remember the name. But the concept, the word that he introduced was flow.
Flow.
Yeah, that was him.
Okay.
The sense of being in flow, right? And he had characteristics of being in flow. I just wrote down some of them. Before this, I'll just I'll read it to you. 8 characteristics of being in flow: complete concentration of the task. Okay. Clarity of goals and reward in the mind and immediate feedback. Okay, transformation of time. Time, as it speeds up, it slows down. It's like a time dilation that happens, right? The experience itself is intrinsically rewarding. You just enjoy it, whether it's coding or diving or whatever it is, yeah? Effortlessness and ease. You're in the environment is in you. There's no separation. You are one with the water is one with you, right? There's a balance between challenge and skills. Okay, right? It's not so challenging that you are inept, and it is not so unchallenging that you're bored.
And even if it is challenging, you are in a state where you can find an answer.
Yeah. So action and awareness are merged, losing self-conscious rumination. I'll come back to self-conscious. This is what I meant. This goes back to what William James was saying. You just react.
And all these qualities are something that, for me, is when I'm behind the camera.
That's your flow state.
That's my flow state.
That's your flow state. That's your mystical state. That's your religion, right? Honestly, you can't be a healthy adult in your 40s without having something like this in your life. You just have to recognize that that's what it is. Yeah. The latest version of this is awe. So awe as an emotion. Okay, awe is what happens when in the presence of a mystery much larger than yourself, right? This is what Mohan was saying about philanthropy, what you were saying about philanthropy. So these are all different states, where you experience the same emotion. And what's happening fundamentally in the emotion is that it's ego death. And then you ask the question, what is ego death? And it turns out the closest we can come to mapping ego, and it's happened in the year 2000, they could map this in activity in the brain. There's a loop that connects the front part of your brain to the mid part of your brain to the hind part of your brain, back and forth. Right. Okay, this loop is engaged whenever you're not doing something. Okay, when you're task engaged, it's off. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. When you're not task engaged, it does self rumination. It makes you think about yourself, the past, the future, etc. Right? It's a very important loop because without that loop, you can't answer questions about Mayur. So there are people who, for example, there's one part of the prefrontal cortex that points inwards. There are people who have lesions over there, and you ask them hey, Mayur, what are you doing? And it'll be I'm going to eat food. You ask them why, they can't tell you that they're hungry.
Damn.
They cannot interrogate internally that they're hungry. They know that they want to eat food, but they don't know why.
They don't know why.
The other thing the default mode network does, right, is that it's a filtration mechanism, right? It tells you, like, of all the input you're receiving in life, tells you what is not important, what is important. Like right now, I'm sitting here talking to you. I can also see that. I can also see that. I can also see that. Like my brain is telling me that's not important. You throw away 99.99999% of the information, right? The default mode network does that. And it helps you figure out the things that are important. It's basically, you can think of the default mode network as a prediction machine. It's learned from the past, you know, and it's predicting from the current signals what is important in the future, right? It moves your mind into the past, into the future, into the past, into the future, into the past, into the future. It's never here, right? You know, it's never here, which is why it's turned off when you're task activated in a flow state, or you're like in a mystical state or experiencing awe. It's off. So the default mode network is, you know, is basically the part of your brain that's both powerful and a problem, right? You know, it's powerful because without it, we could not build the society that we're in, right? If we are not able to learn from the past, make prediction of the future. You know, like I come to work today, I haven't farmed any food. I'm expecting somebody else will have made food somewhere for me. That person expects me to have not had food. And so we predict each other's behavior. And we build this amazing society and all that stuff, right? That's all because we're able to make these predictions about each other. And so it's very powerful, right? But like any powerful piece of software, it needs to be reset from time to time. Otherwise, it collects garbage. Okay, that garbage collection is the problem. Like,
and it gets accumulated.
And when the garbage collection is associated with a lot of stress, you don't do something in your social network to like reduce it, or you don't have your trance mechanism, which by the way can also be thought of as like a mystical religious experience, which by the way can also be thought of as a flow state, which by the way can also be thought of as an awe experience, which by the way is like you switching off your default mode network.
Arjun, just interesting, okay? I mean, all this that you've just described, there's a reference to it in Gita as well.
Oh my God, this is a whole, you know, like there's a whole separate, you know, discussion,
which I think I want to do at some point, but maybe if you can just quickly touch on that.
Yeah. My whole thesis for this is like Darwin's Gita, you know, because this neurological mechanism that I'm highlighting is, you know, is Darwinian, right? You know, in some sense, it's based out of science. Darwin's third book, right, which nobody talks a whole lot about, was about like studying of emotions and expressions in animals and human beings, and saying there's an underlying characteristic to them, like a swabhava, as we would say, right? You know, then Arjuna's like narrative, I mean Krishna's narrative to Arjuna on the battlefield was also like, boss, you know, like your swabhava right now, you are a warrior, like do your karma, like karma. You know, be like you have to do you, right? You know,
yes,
like don't worry about the rest. Like I wanted, so there's like an intersection between these ideas, which is super interesting, you know, and I sort of used it in myself to try and figure out like what is the thing that I am like God designed me as an animal to inhabit what ecosystem?
Yeah.
Like what is my ecosystem that I will thrive at? And you take this animal out of this ecosystem, put it somewhere else, it'll struggle, right? And so when I was underwater thinking about the stuff, like reformulating like how I wanted to re-enter the work, career, like what were good, what were pros, what were cons, and all that stuff, like I found a lot of solace in the Gita, you know, and also neuroscience. You know?
So it's a beautiful balance of both, because there are answers in both.
There are links, obviously, as Indians, as Hindus, right? Like our culture for 5,000 years has been trying to answer, like, you know, what is the purpose of life, right? Because in our cosmology, like, there's no eternal heaven, there's no eternal hell. You recycle all the time, right? You know, your end desire is nirvana. You want to be like snuffed out like a flame, right? So we don't have like the privilege of eternal paradise. So we are just here. We're just being recycled, right? And so like Hindus and I think Eastern religions in general have really tried to figure out what is the point of living when you know that everything is Maya. Everything is Maya. Nothing matters. We know that.
We know that.
We all know that, you know, there's no doubt about it, right? Then how do you live day to day, right? You know, there's no golden reward or like golden, you know, this thing.
Everything is in the present.
And so we evolved this like really intricate notion of like dharma and karma and like what actions are in line with your dharma and what actions accrue karma and what actions don't accrue karma. And Krishna talks about this, you know, to Arjuna, right? He's basically trying to like educate Arjuna to saying that, look, boss, you have you have a neurological like specialty. You are designed by me to play this role.
Particular role right
you
now.
have been chosen by me to play this role. So why don't you just play this role and stop the angst? Just like man up and be Arjuna.
No, but that's so true, right? I mean, beautifully put. It's
Yeah.
end of the day,
Yeah.
we with whatever we spoke so far,
Yeah.
it's all about the turmoil.
All of the turmoil, and it's just like see it, recognize the svabhava. And if you don't have this like moments of trance in your weekly routine, you won't recognize who you are.
Yeah.
In our Ayurveda, we would talk about like sattvic, tamasic, rajasic, or we would talk about like vata, pitta,
Pitta.
kapha. Like we were talking about this that way. Or like if you're in medieval, European, right? They had 4 humors, right? The equivalent of vata. There was like melancholic,
Melancholic,
choleric, phlegmatic, and sanguine, right? These were the like excess of blood is sanguine, excess of one color, black bile is melancholic, yellow bile is choleric, blah blah blah, right?
yeah.
They had a notion that we are neurodiverse, okay? That we are all neurodiverse, and our neurodiversity means that we will thrive in some ecosystems and not others. And so when you are not aware of this, you are therefore putting yourself at like, under a lot of pressure, right? To thrive in an ecology that's not good for you, right? And so discovering this, discovering that practice, discovering that trance helps you, like they all support each other. Like when you're in a trance or the zone, you can see things about yourself that otherwise you would not see. And then when you know who you are, then the healing activities get built into your daily routine. So you don't have to go very far from your like quote unquote work.
So, but Arjun, okay.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, right? I mean, you have discovered or rediscovered all this after having gone through, right? The ups and downs, and then with your own curiosity of trying to figure things out, you've done this. Now you're trying to also bring all this into one place.
Well, I haven't tried to bring it to one place, but I have an idea.
Of doing it.
Yeah, and like my idea of bringing it to one place would be something along the lines of what we discussed. The need for periodic reset, the need to avoid social isolation, how this periodic reset. We've talked about it over the decades. We've talked about it as a religious experience. We've talked about it as like a mystical experience. We've talked about it as an awe experience. We've talked about runner's high. There's a common neurological underlying to all of this stuff. It's it's deactivating the default mode network, so your other parts of your brain can talk to each other, and you actually see something about yourself that you could not see. What is the thing to see? The thing to see is actually your svabhava, and we've been talking about svabhava in in traditional
Context and
this and what can you use in your introspection to discover your svabhava, right? What are the dimensions you can use? Unfortunately, the science is very early on this, right? So we cannot see this in great detail. So some of it has to be driven by like internal introspection and all that stuff. There are books around this. I call this entire like idea of like finding your like neurological niche in the world, inhabiting it fully with no shame, with great joy and exuberance. I call that whole package, I call it Darwin's Gita. Right? It is the lessons of the Bhagavad Gita filtered through
Darwin, science, everything.
And finding that overlap between those ideas. And I'm lucky being Indian that I have access to this literature, and I'm not like, I see it as a source of wisdom.
Correct.
Right? I don't see it as folk tales. Right? I see it as a source of wisdom. I see it as our culture's attempt to answer the question of how do you live when you know everything is Maya, right? And they've tried to deal with it very well.
Very well.
Yeah,
and it's been documented.
Yeah, it's a captivating text, right? It's 800 lines, it's had 800 commentaries, East and West, people have been fascinated with it for like, ever since they hear about it. So I think there are some notions around that we can bring to practice on a daily basis, right? Whether you're in a startup or something like this, idea of passion, I think is very close but not perfect, right? The idea, like if you can do work that is your dharma, if you can discover who you are and therefore what is your dharma, and you can do that. Then you can do that with great heart and great effort and great intensity for a long time. Because when you're doing that, you are free of social isolation. You are in that trance state all the time.
All the time.
Right? So if you can find that and you can live that, then all of this debate about work, life, this, that, passion, all turns into dust.
Okay, let me summarize it this way.
Yeah.
It's what this whole conversation of the last couple of hours that made me realize is we all have to go through our journey. But fortunately, there are books, there's
tools,
enough tools
There's ideas that are out there. Yeah.
that we can
Use.
use, and if we are aware of it and just follow even 20% of it, we can beat depression, we can beat so many things, tackle life, be present in the moment. And luckily, thankfully for you, you actually, being the curious explorer that you are,
The book is still, only half written.
but it is half written,
Yeah,
right?
okay. I mean to say, like, the whole thesis is only I have to now live it, no? Like,
Live it.
I have to live this.
But you started your journey.
Yeah, I'm trying,
But awesome. I mean, Arjun, it's been an awesome conversation, a lot of takeaways, and I'm definitely looking forward for that next conversation on
the whole neuroscience
the
conversation.
neurosciences
Man.
and Gita.
And Ayurveda.
And Ayurveda, a lot more that we want to talk
Yeah,
about.
And Freud. There's a lot of stuff around
a
there.
lot of
yeah,
stuff around.
yeah.
But Arjun, thanks a
Yeah.
ton for doing this.
Wonderful.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
Honestly, for me, it's definitely been an eye opener because I could relate myself personally in many of the phases, anecdotes that
You're
you
an
spoke
artist. You
about.
live with passion, so you
So
feel it.
now I just need to break out
Yeah.
and find my own answers. But thanks for the podcast, but more so, personally, thanks for doing that.
Thank you for having me. I think it was also great to talk about this. There is a taboo, especially if you're an entrepreneur. There's a taboo to indicating that you're a mortal human being. Like you're not supposed to be superhuman. So for me, also, this is about breaking a taboo and being like authentic in some sense. And thanks a lot.
You're welcome. So I hope you found this talk interesting today. And all I want to say is find your mojo.